I'm Evan Carter. I'm 28 years old, and for the last 3 years, I've lived alone in a small one-bedroom apartment on the north side of Chicago. From the outside, my life looks calm and organized. My apartment always looks neat. The couch sits perfectly against the wall, the coffee table is clean, and there's a small bookshelf with a few novels. I keep telling myself I will finish someday, but the truth is simple. I don't own enough things to make a mess. There's a couch, a coffee table, a small dining table I rarely use, and a bed that is always made. Not because I'm perfect, but because I like the feeling that everything in my life is under control. The rest of the apartment is empty space, quiet space. And honestly, I had gotten used to that quiet. I work in downtown Chicago at a mid-size media company. My job is content strategy, which sounds impressive when you say it out loud, but most days it just means fixing other people's work. I rewrite messy proposals. I clean up presentations before they go to clients. I find the holes in ideas before anyone else notices them. If I do my job well, no one talks about it. The presentation looks smooth, the client is happy, and everyone moves on. If I miss something, everyone notices. It's invisible work, but steady work. And I've never been the type of person who needs applause. Most nights I stay at the office later than everyone else, 7, 8, sometimes even 9 at night. Partly because it helps me focus, but mostly because I've never been in a rush to go home. That Thursday night felt like every other late night. The office floor was almost completely dark, except for the lights above my desk. Outside the huge windows, Chicago glittered the way it always does. Street lights, glowing buildings, and the faint red blinking lights on top of the John Hancock Tower. I was staring at a 53-page proposal on my screen, trying to make it sound less like corporate nonsense and more like something a real human might actually enjoy reading. My eyes were burning from staring at the screen too long. I had already finished my 3rd cup of coffee when I heard the elevator ding. At first, I didn't even look up. I assumed it was security making their usual rounds. Then I heard footsteps. Slow footsteps. Confident ones. They stopped right in front of my desk. When I looked up, I saw Vivien Hart. Vivien was the director of marketing, my boss's boss, and she was still wearing the same charcoal blazer and tailored trousers she'd worn all day. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly into the same precise knot she always wore in meetings. In her hands were 2 coffee cups. She set one of them on my desk without saying anything. Then she leaned lightly against the edge of the cubicle wall, arms crossed. "You're still here," she said. It wasn't really a question. "Looks like it," I replied. She glanced at the clock on the far wall. "Almost 9. I want this proposal ready for tomorrow's review." Vivien nodded once, like that answer made sense. Then she did something I wasn't expecting. She pulled an empty chair from the cubicle next to mine and sat down. Not for a second. Not for a quick comment. She sat down like she planned to stay for a while. Then she placed her bag on her lap and studied me quietly. I waited for her to explain why the director of marketing was sitting at my desk after hours. But she didn't say anything right away. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Then she placed it face up on my desk. The screen was already open. It was a dating app, and it was her profile. I stared at it for a moment, not sure if I was misunderstanding the situation. "You've used this before?" she asked calmly. "Yeah," I said, "a while back." "Good." She slid the phone slightly closer to me. "Look at my profile and tell me what's wrong with it." For a second, I thought she might be joking, but she wasn't smiling, so I picked up the phone. The first photo was clearly professional. Studio lighting, perfect posture, neutral background. And it looked more like a conference headshot than a dating picture. The second photo showed her on stage during an industry event, pointing at a presentation slide. The third photo looked like it was from a company gala. She was wearing a black dress and holding an award. The bio underneath read like a business introduction. Marketing executive, MBA, passionate about brand growth and strategic challenges, looking for a meaningful connection with someone driven and intellectually curious. I slowly scrolled through the profile, then I looked back up at her. You want the honest answer? That's why I'm here. I hesitated for a second, then I said it. It reads like a LinkedIn profile. Vivien blinked once. Then something surprising happened. She laughed. It was a short, quiet laugh, like she hadn't expected my answer. That bad? It's not bad, I said. It's just corporate. She tilted her head slightly. Explain. It tells people what you do, I said, but it doesn't tell them who you are. Vivien leaned back in the chair, crossing her arms again. I've had 6 dates in the last 4 months, she said, and every one of them felt like a job interview. I didn't know what to say to that, so instead, I looked back down at the phone. If you actually want help fixing it, I said, we should start with the photos. Her eyebrow lifted slightly. You think you can do better? I think we can do better. I rolled my chair closer so we could both see the screen. For the next 40 minutes, we went through her photos together. I told her the professional headshot shouldn't be the first picture. It felt too formal, too distant. After scrolling through dozens of photos, she stopped on one from a company picnic last summer. She was wearing a simple white shirt and jeans. Her hair was loose and blowing in the wind. She was laughing at something outside the frame. No posing, no pressure. Just her. This one, I said. Put it first. She frowned at the screen. I look ridiculous. You look human, I replied. Which is the whole point. She studied the picture for a few seconds. Then she tapped it and moved it to the top spot. Next, we worked on the bio. Instead of the polished answers she probably gave in meetings, I asked her simple questions. What did she actually do on weekends? What kind of movies did she like? What made her stay up too late at night? At first, her answers were cautious, like she was deciding how much she wanted to reveal. But slowly, she relaxed. She told me she liked baking sourdough bread from scratch. Every Sunday morning, she walked along the lakefront before the city woke up. And she loved old Western movies, the black and white ones with long, quiet scenes and wide landscapes. Once, she even drove 3 hours just to watch an old restored Western in a small theater. Why isn't any of that in your profile? I asked. She shrugged slightly. It felt too personal. That's the point, I said. Dating is personal. She looked at me differently then, not like a director reviewing an employee, but like someone seeing another person clearly for the first time. Finally, I handed her the phone back. Her profile looked completely different now. Warmer. Real. Still confident, but less guarded. She stared at it quietly. Do you think it'll work better? She asked. If it doesn't, I said, at least people will be matching with the real you. Vivien slowly stood up and picked up her bag. Before leaving, she paused beside my desk. Thank you, Evan, she said softly, for being honest. Then she walked toward the elevator. The doors closed behind her, and the office went silent again. But for the first time that night, I couldn't focus on the proposal in front of me, because something about that conversation kept replaying in my mind. And I had the strange feeling that my quiet, predictable life had just changed in a way I didn't fully understand yet. 2 days after I helped Vivien fix her dating profile, I was shutting down my laptop at the office when she walked past my desk. Usually when Vivien walked through the office, she moved fast. Why, purposeful. Clipboard in hand or phone pressed to her ear, already halfway to her next meeting. But this time she stopped. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of my cubicle wall. Her voice was low, quiet enough that only I could hear it. "The new profile worked," she said. I looked up at her. "Yeah?" She nodded once. "More matches." I leaned back slightly in my chair. "That's good, right?" She gave a small smile. Not the polished smile she used during presentations. This one was softer. "A lot more matches." Then she added something that caught me off guard. "I deleted most of them." "Why?" She held my gaze for a moment longer than usual. "Because I realized I didn't want to sit across from another stranger pretending to be interesting." Something tightened in my chest, though I couldn't explain why. And then she tilted her head slightly. "Are you busy tomorrow night?" I hesitated for half a second. She was technically still above me in the company structure, even if HR was already in the process of shifting my reporting line. But the way she asked the question was calm and direct. No games. "I don't think so," I said. "Good." She nodded once. "Then come have tacos with me." "Tacos?" "There's a place on Division," she said. "You mentioned it once, the one with the Al Pastor tacos." I remembered saying that months ago during a random lunch conversation. I hadn't expected her to remember. "What time?" I asked. 7. She turned slightly. "I'll meet you there." Then she walked away like the conversation had been completely normal. But the rest of my afternoon felt anything but normal. The next evening, I stood in my apartment staring at my closet longer than I wanted to admit. I changed shirts 4 times, not because I didn't know what looked good, but because I kept second-guessing everything. Too casual, too formal, trying too hard. Eventually, I settled on dark jeans and a simple button-down. I told myself it was just tacos. I told myself it wasn't really a date. But when I left the apartment, my pulse was definitely faster than usual. The restaurant was small and narrow, with exposed brick walls and warm string lights hanging across the ceiling. It was busy but comfortable, a few couples talking quietly, a group of friends laughing over drinks. I arrived a few minutes early and grabbed a seat near the window. I was checking my phone when the door opened. Vivien walked in. For a second, I almost didn't recognize her. At the office, she was always precise. Blazer buttoned, hair pinned neatly back, posture perfect. Tonight, she looked completely different. She wore a soft cream sweater that slipped slightly off one shoulder, dark jeans, and ankle boots. Her hair was down, falling in loose waves around her face. When she saw me, she smiled. Not the polite smile from meetings, a real one. "Sorry I'm 2 minutes late," she said, as she sat down across from me. "Traffic was awful." "You're fine," I said. "I just got here." We ordered tacos and a couple beers. When the food arrived, we ate quietly for the first few minutes. Not awkward silence. Comfortable silence. Then the conversation started naturally. She asked about my weekend plans. I asked about her lakefront walks. We talked about Chicago itself, how the city feels different every season, how winter makes everything feel smaller, how the lake somehow looks completely different in summer. She told me she grew up outside Detroit. Her parents had started with almost nothing and built a small business that supported the whole family. After college, she moved to Chicago for grad school and never left. "It felt like a city where ambition still had space to grow," she said. I told her I grew up in Flagstaff, quiet streets, dry air, mountains instead of skyscrapers. "I came here chasing the idea of a bigger life," I admitted. "And did you find it?" she asked. I shrugged. "I found steady work." She smiled slightly. "Steady isn't a bad thing." Somewhere between the second round of tacos and our third beers, the conversation shifted, and it became more personal without either of us forcing it. "I'm good at executing things," she said thoughtfully. "Plans, timelines, projects. I can make things happen." She wiped a bit of salsa from her hand with a napkin. But when it comes to letting someone actually see me, she paused. I'm apparently terrible at that. You're not terrible, I said. You're careful. She studied me over the rim of her glass. Is that a polite way of saying guarded? Maybe, I said. But most people are. She tilted her head slightly. Not you. I laughed quietly. Steady is a nice way of saying boring. No, she said softly. Steady is rare. After dinner, we stepped outside. The air was cool and fresh, early spring in Chicago. Cars passed slowly down the street while people moved along the sidewalks. Yet we walked side by side without any real destination. I used to believe something, she said after a while. What? That if I worked hard enough at everything else, the rest of life would just fall into place. She looked down at the sidewalk. Career, reputation, relationships. She stopped walking. If I checked all the boxes, someone would eventually want to stay. And I checked the boxes, she said quietly. People still left. We stood under a street lamp, the yellow light soft around us. She turned to face me fully. I didn't hand you my phone the other night just because of the dating profile, she admitted. Then why? Because I wanted someone to tell me the truth. I looked at her for a long moment. Not as the director of marketing, not as the woman who ran meetings with perfect confidence, but just as the person standing in front of me. I think you already know the truth, I said. You just needed someone to say it out loud. She studied my face quietly. Then something unexpected happened. She stepped closer. Before I could react, she leaned in and pressed her lips gently against my cheek. The kiss was quick. Simple, but deliberate. When she stepped back, her eyes stayed on mine. At least now, she said softly, I can delete the app. I smiled. I think you can. We walked together until we reached the corner where our paths split. Good night, Evan, she said. Good night, Vivien. I watched her disappear into the moving crowd. Then I started walking toward the train station. The city lights blurred slightly as I moved through the streets. For the first time in years, but my life didn't feel quiet in the same way. It felt like something new had started, something neither of us had planned, and something neither of us fully understood yet. The weeks after that night didn't feel dramatic or rushed. There was no sudden whirlwind romance. Instead, everything moved slowly, quietly, like two people learning each other one piece at a time. We didn't officially tell anyone at work about us. There was no big announcement, but people noticed small things. Vivien stopping by my desk a little longer than necessary. The way we sometimes caught each other's eyes during meetings. Marcus from strategy once saw us both reaching for the same coffee pot and gave me a small smirk. Paula from marketing noticed the container of sourdough Vivien had brought me one morning and simply raised an eyebrow, but no one said anything, and somehow that made it easier. We started seeing each other a few nights every week. Sometimes we grabbed dinner near the river. Other nights we stayed at my apartment with takeout containers spread across the coffee table. One Tuesday evening, she showed up at my door, holding a paper bag from a bakery in Wicker Park. Inside were 2 warm loaves of sourdough bread. I told you I bake, she said. We sat in my kitchen eating fresh bread with butter while the city lights slowly faded outside the window. That night, I started seeing parts of her I had never seen in the office. At work, she was always composed. Perfect posture, controlled voice, every sentence measured. But in my apartment, she was different. She kicked off her shoes the moment she walked in. She walked barefoot across the hardwood floors. She pushed her sleeves up while cooking and hummed old jazz songs quietly to herself. Sometimes she laughed when she realized she was doing it. She hated leaving dishes in the sink overnight, so after dinner, she would wash them while I dried them. And we talked about simple things, how the lake looked from her balcony in the early morning, why she loved old black and white movies more than modern ones, which songs made her feel like she was 20 again. One Sunday evening, she stayed over for the first time. It wasn't planned. We had watched an old Western movie together on my laptop. Halfway through the film, she rested her head on my shoulder. When the credits rolled, neither of us moved. She looked up at me quietly. "I should go," she said. But she didn't move. I kissed her then. Slowly. Carefully. Like I was asking a question. She answered by kissing me back. Her fingers slipped gently into my hair as she pulled closer. We ended up on the couch laughing softly when the cushions shifted under us. Nothing about it felt rushed. Nothing felt forced. It just felt honest. Later that night, she fell asleep with her head resting on my chest. I stayed awake for a long time staring at the ceiling. It had been years since someone had fallen asleep next to me like that, without expectations, without pressure, just presence. Slowly, I started opening up too, not all at once, but in small pieces. I told her about the years after college when I wanted to become a writer. I had filled notebooks with half-finished stories before eventually choosing a safer path, a steady job, a steady life. I told her about relationships that had ended quietly, not because of arguments, but because both people slowly drifted apart. She never interrupted when I talked. Sometimes she simply reached over and squeezed my hand, like she understood without needing to explain anything. One night, we were sitting on the floor in my apartment with our backs against the couch. 2 glasses of wine rested on the table beside us. A quiet jazz record played softly in the background. I asked the question that had been on my mind for weeks. "Why are you so careful?" She stared down at her glass for a moment. Then she took a slow breath. "I was engaged once," she said quietly. 7 years ago. I stayed silent. "He was perfect on paper," she continued. "Same background, same ambitions, same friends." She gave a small, tired laugh. "Everyone said we were the perfect couple." "What happened?" I asked, gently. She leaned back against the couch. "I realized I wasn't building a life with him," she said. "I was completing a project." Every word she spoke sounded thoughtful, like she had replayed this memory many times before. The closer we got to the wedding, the more trapped I felt. She paused. "I called it off 3 weeks before the ceremony. That must have been hard," I said. "It was brutal." Her voice softened. "My family didn't understand. Some friends stopped talking to me. People thought I was afraid of commitment." She turned toward me. "But I knew something important." "What?" "That loving someone shouldn't feel like completing a checklist." The room went quiet again. Outside the window, the city continued moving. Cars passing, and sirens in the distance, life happening everywhere. "And now?" I asked. She looked at me carefully. "Now I'm sitting on the floor of a man's apartment who told me my dating profile looked like LinkedIn." A small smile appeared on her face. "And I'm not running away." I smiled too. Good, because I wasn't running either. Over the next few weeks, our lives slowly blended together. Her apartment started feeling familiar to me. My apartment started carrying small signs of her presence. A toothbrush next to mine in the bathroom, her sweater hanging over the back of the couch, a jar of sourdough starter in the fridge with a note attached. "Feed me every day, or I die." I laughed the first time I saw it, but I fed it every day. One Sunday morning in late April, we were in her kitchen, and she was kneading bread dough while I prepared coffee. Soft music played from the radio. Suddenly she spoke. "New York called again." I looked up. "The VP role?" She nodded. "They want an answer by next week." I slowly placed the coffee press on the counter. What are you thinking? She wiped flour from her hands and leaned against the counter. I used to think the next step was always the right step, she said. Better job, bigger title, bigger city. She looked directly at me. But now I'm not sure. Because of us? I asked. Because of everything, she said quietly. The words stayed between us for a moment. I don't want to be the reason you turn down something important, I said. You're not the reason, she replied gently. I'm just choosing something different. Later that evening, we sat on her balcony watching the sunset over the rooftops. The sky slowly faded from orange to deep blue. Finally, she turned to me. I'm going to say no to New York. You're sure? She nodded. For once, I want to stay somewhere. She reached for my hand. With someone. I leaned forward and kissed her slowly. Not rushed, not uncertain, just grateful. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after that. There were still doubts sometimes, still moments when old fears returned. But we stopped guessing what the other person felt. We talked about things openly. We chose honesty instead of silence. Months later, one evening, I walked into my apartment after work. The lights in the kitchen were on. Vivien stood at the counter wearing one of my old shirts with the sleeves rolled up. A bottle of wine was open. 2 glasses were waiting. Bread and cheese were already on the table. She looked up when I entered. You're late, she said. Traffic. I set my bag down. What's all this? Dinner, she said, and maybe a conversation. We sat together at the table. After a few quiet minutes, she placed her hand over mine. I used to think the goal was always moving forward, she said. Bigger job, bigger city, bigger life. She looked around my small kitchen. But lately, I've been thinking something else. What? Maybe the goal is finding a place worth staying. I squeezed her hand gently. And did you find one? She smiled. I think I did. There were no dramatic promises, no big speeches, and just the quiet certainty between us. Later that night, we stood together on the balcony outside my apartment. She leaned against my shoulder. I'm not saying forever, she said softly. I'm saying today, and tomorrow, and the day after that. I wrapped my arm around her. That's enough for me. For years, my life had been quiet and controlled. A clean apartment, a predictable routine. No surprises. Then one night, my boss had walked into the office with 2 cups of coffee and a dating profile that looked like a resume. And somehow, between fixing her photos and rewriting her bio, we both discovered something we weren't expecting. Sometimes, the best things in life begin with the simplest moment, like helping someone tell the truth about who they really are.